Dominic Lahiff, writer and director of Slow Light. Welcome. Thank you for speaking with me. Let's start off by telling the listeners what is Slow Light?
Slow Light is a female revenge thriller. The story itself actually revolves around a girl who commits suicide because of a sex tape which has been uploaded to the internet, and the sister which sets out to avenge her death. Slow Light is also a first of its kind. It's an audio-visual album. So in essence, it's a silent film which is divided into 12 chapters, with each chapter being set to a track from the debut solo album by Neil Davidge, and that's Neil Davidge of Massive Attack.
Mm-hmm. So this is going to be a feature-length film?
Yeah, it's going to be about 75 minutes long.
And it's really interesting, going back to what you said, that the film is kind of uses Neil Davidge's solo album as a foundation for the narrative. How did you conceive this concept?
Okay, so my producer and I first worked with Neil in 2013. We were commissioned to create a film for the American Museum of Natural History, which plays before the space show, the Dome show there. So we were commissioned to create a 10-minute film which kind of simply explained the concepts, which were more fully explored within the Dome show, and that was, a series of images which are set to music. And the story was, a little girl, she wakes up in her bedroom in the middle of the night. She interacts with various objects in her bedroom. And through her interactions with these objects, she kind of triggers these on-screen supers, which explain various concepts of astronomy and cosmology. I can actually send you a link to that, or post a link to that, if your readership or listeners are interested to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that process, we contacted several composers, and it was Neil's work which really kind of stood out for us. So what Neil did was he sent us his entire album, and he asked us to choose a track which we would then adapt and kind of use as the basis for this museum film. So we chose one of the tracks, which was a track called That Fever, and then we kind of based the images on the movements of that track. So the film itself is about 10 minutes. Neil extended the track for us, and once that process was complete, we were really happy with the kind of marriage of our visuals and Neil's music. We still had his album. We sort of continued to listen to the album, and it really haunted us. Like, it has this incredibly cinematic sound. It has very light moods. It has very dark moods. It has these moments of extreme kind of transcendence, and it also has these moments of extreme sorrow and sadness. So we began to sort of, feel that we could wring a narrative out of this, and as far as we knew, it was something which hadn't really been previously explored. My producer and I have always been very interested in film noir, in kind of femme fatales, in female revenge thrillers, in these type of movies where the typical kind of white male protagonist of Hollywood film has the tables turned on him and has his expectations kind of completely ripped out from underneath him, and has his position of dominance and control almost kind of exploited. I mean, if you look at recent movies, I suppose some good examples would be Ex Machina, Alex Garland film, also the two most recent Fincher movies, which would be Gone Girl and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And then if you reach a little further back into film history, you could almost look at kind of classic film noirs like Double Indemnity, Scarlet Street, and Out of the Past as, kind of the antecedents to that. So yeah, those were influences which we had always felt, and those were themes which we always wanted to explore. So in conjunction with Neil's album, with the moods and the contrasting feelings of Neil's album, and kind of informed by those influences, we began to put a story together. And the idea was to start with the male perspective, to start with very much our audience identifying with a male character. But then at the halfway point, we would shift, and then we would identify with the female perspective, with the female character, and it would kind of turn into this female revenge thriller.
Now, the way that you tell the story, like you said, it switches perspective, which I think is interesting, especially considering that at its core, it seems like it's a revenge thriller that has a female lead. I was wondering if you could expand on how your portraying the story with that shift in perspective.
Yeah, sure.
From male to female.
That's a really great question, actually. So the first 6 chapters of the story, obviously each chapter being set to a track from the album, they're actually told from the male point of view. So we pick up our lead character, and he's kind of mourning the death of his mother. And he's actually in free fall. You know, he's going through a very difficult time. He's kind of leading this very aimless, debauched existence where he's going out every night and he's drinking and he's indulging himself and he's womanizing. He actually meets a new woman, this very beautiful, mysterious woman, who initially he just thinks is going to be his latest sexual conquest, but she actually begins to move further into his very closely guarded inner life. Now, at the halfway point, we're introduced to a completely new character who is mourning the death of her sister. Shortly after her introduction, we find out via a phone call that she and the mysterious woman are actually very closely affiliated, and she has employed the services of this woman to dig deeper and to find evidence of a sex tape, which our lead male character has been hiding. And then, you know, once they have ascertained his guilt in making this sex tape, they plan to enact their kind of vengeance on him. So if you think of it like a kind of reverse take on Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock film, where, you know, we begin with our female character who's actually the lead, and then she winds up getting murdered halfway through the film, and then, you know, obviously our audience identification shifts to the Norman Bates character. So the perspective at the midway point in the slow line film actually shifts to the you know, to the female characters, to their perspective, to their kind of efforts to get to the bottom of this mystery.
Now, you have a trailer up on the Kickstarter page that you guys already created. It contains a lot of kind of stylized and surreal imagery. Is this something that will be featured prominently throughout the full-length film?
Very much so. It's very much going to be, you know, this kind of very surreal, kind of redolent, stylized imagery. But we're hoping that the narrative will be, you know, kind of clearly felt as well. Obviously, prior to the introduction of sound, all film was silent, and, you know, a lot of people have kind of critiqued and commented that one of the biggest blows to the development of visual language in cinema was the introduction. The idea behind the trailer itself was the sister kind of reminiscing over this sexual episode while she was in the bathtub, and actually, you know, kind of having quite dark and suicidal thoughts because she had felt humiliated by this.
And so, just to clarify, this is going to be, is there going to be any dialogue in this? Any kind of like expository dialogue, or is it going to be just straight up using the music?
Yeah, we may use some VO in places. You know, we may use VO and little bits of sound design, but for the most part, it's going to be, you know, purely visuals and music.
Fantastic. That's great. So the trailer looks gorgeous. So I'm assuming that the film is going to look as gorgeous as the trailer. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're shooting the film?
Yeah, sure, of course. So we're shooting the film quite traditionally, actually, with 35mm film stock, which is something that we endeavor to do. Obviously, it's becoming harder and harder to do these days with the proliferation of digital cameras, and, you know, there is a slightly higher degree of effort involved with shooting film. But, you know, we think that even now, when you're delivering something to the web, if that's your kind of most basic delivery format, there is such a huge deluge of content being uploaded to channels such as YouTube and Vimeo every day. We feel that film is still the best way to make your story stand out, you know, from this massive kind of very generic looking digital footage where people apply filters in post, where people kind of, you know, they are, you know, kind of overly reliant on post tools to, you know, to define their look. Whereas with shooting film, we've always found that obviously you're limited in what you shoot because, you know, you have to buy the film stock, you have to account for processing the film stock and transferring it. So you actually have to be a lot more disciplined about what it is that you're going to shoot before you move into the production. So you solve a lot of your problems that, you know, if you shoot digital, you're kind of trying to solve the problems in post-production. You're trying to think through this massive footage that you've shot, whereas when you're shooting film, you actually have to be a lot more judicious in what you shoot, and therefore you have to develop your story a lot more fully in advance. So we feel at least that it results in a much more satisfactory product, both aesthetically and in terms of the discipline of filmmaking and narratively. From a personal perspective, I also find that film captures skin tones, human skin tones, in a way which is much more tangible and relatable than video. I mean, certainly we've shot both on digital formats and on film formats, and the kind of emotional reaction, the visceral reaction that we get from viewers has always been far greater, kind of vis-a-vis what you just conveyed to me, to the projects which originated on film than it has been to the project which originated on digital. Also, budgetary wise, there's actually a lot less light required to make a beautiful looking image on film than there is on digital. There's you can actually move from a very dimly lit interior to a very brightly kind of sunlit exterior and not have to do a huge kind of exposure compensation when you move between those areas. So you can actually move a lot more quickly and nimbly than you can were you to shoot digital.
And I also noticed the one thing about film versus digital is that although it's getting better, the blacks in film are always much blacker. They're much deeper blacks, and in your trailer at least you predominantly used a lot of deep blacks in that, and it just really popped. It looked really great.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely a concern, and that was definitely obviously the feeling of the trailer itself is quite dark. The girl's mood is, she's weeping, she's in a bathtub full of inky black water, so emotionally she's in a very dark place, and obviously we did want to convey that through the visuals of the trailer. And yeah, I mean film, digital, you can see into shadow areas a lot with digital, but we did like that element of shadow and light, of darkness and light. That was something that we, there was an important kind of theme to us running throughout the piece.
Let's talk about the Kickstarter campaign itself. So as of this recording on August 20th, you have 2 weeks left with a goal of $70,000. In addition to seeing the final product, I was wondering if you could tell us about some of the rewards that backers can receive for donating.
Sure. So the backers can receive rewards all the way from, kind of various pieces of merchandise, which have been exclusively designed for the production. We worked with some very, very talented designers. There was Brandon Schaefer, who has a company called Of Seek and Speak, and he does tons of indie films, too many to mention, but he's a brilliant designer who works for very, very competitive rates. And then we worked with some newer designers out of England called Of Stick and Bone, who actually first came to my attention. They did this beautiful kind of fan-made poster for Cronenberg's Videodrome, where they hand-painted a picture of Debbie Harry, and then they added lots of kind of computer glitch on top of that, which was this beautiful standalone piece. We contacted them on the basis of that, and they agreed to come on board the Slow Light project and create this custom artwork. Interestingly enough, we also have the project is backed by Neil Davidge, so we have a lot of rewards which kind of span Neil's musical career. We have signed copies of his albums with Massive Attack. We actually, at the higher end of the reward tiers, we have original compositions made by Neil himself. He's offered to take donors on a musical tour of Bristol, to the studios where kind of Portishead's album was recorded, to where the classic Massive Attack albums are recorded, to where 3D from Massive Attack's Graffiti, kind of first went up. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but one of the founding members of Massive Attack was actually the graffiti inspiration for Banksy. Banksy based a lot of his earlier work, or took a lot of his early inspiration from 3D of Massive Attack. So those are all things that donors could enjoy on this kind of personal tour with Neil through the streets of Bristol. Obviously, again, there's huge kind of potential in licensing a track from Neil. Obviously, apart from the Massive Attack albums, he's also done the Halo 4 soundtrack, which was the biggest selling video game soundtrack of all time, as well as, kind of many movie soundtracks, which are kind of too numerous to actually mention here. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the rewards are great. We've also paired with an audio brand called M Audio, who actually donated a number of their new Code Series keyboards to the Kickstarter, which are available on the Kickstarter to donors at sub-retail price. So the retail price is actually lower than they would pay anywhere else, and this is a keyboard that's just been released. Then obviously we have your more traditional Kickstarter fare. We have premiere tickets, executive producer credits, DVDs, Blu-rays, postcards, tote bags, PDFs of the script, the digipack, which is the digital download of the film, the digital download of the album. It's got behind the scenes photographs, behind the scenes videos. We also have, to promote the film format, we have a lesson in shooting film for anyone that would care to to learn more about actually shooting film, and a tour of Panavision. I'm sure there's a couple more which I've forgotten, but that is pretty much everything that comes to mind right now.
Yeah. Just as in a quick aside, right before we did this interview, I was reading an article about Banksy's new installation that he has going right now, and I read that they're doing a big concert there, and Massive Attack's going to be there.
Yeah. I mean, there's a very close, obviously, the Bristol scene. I'm not sure if you've ever been to Bristol, but it's quite a small city, so the kind of creative community there is a very tight-knit community.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, just talking about the rewards, I've done a lot of these interviews with Kickstarter projects, and sometimes the rewards are a little but these are extremely high quality. I just wanted to say that because I'm just looking through. That was one thing that immediately caught my eye. The posters are extremely well done, and just the fact that you can get the M Audio keyboards and stuff, that's great.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, we did spend a lot of time putting together, we spent a lot of time in pre-production on the Kickstarter, and that's something that obviously, I'm no expert, and we haven't yet reached our goal. We're hoping to, knock on wood. But I would recommend, that's something that we try and bring to every element, whether we're shooting something or how we're embarking on a project. Preparation is the key. We were preparing to launch for most of the year, so we were kind of getting our elements together pretty far in advance. And the same with the trailer. We spent an enormous amount of time preparing for the trailer, deciding what it is we were going to shoot and how we were going to shoot it. The same with the script. Obviously, we spent a large amount of time listening to the album, subdividing it into chapters, deciding exactly what would happen in which chapter, which character's perspective the chapter would be told from, and how the sequence of events in the chapter would actually sync with the musical movement of the album, because obviously the music is dictating the emotion and feeling of the of the visuals itself. So the events portrayed in each chapter had to advance the story, had to make sense as a narrative, but also had to synchronize with the music. You can't have, this very kind of bombastic, active track with some very ponderous, kind of emotional, slow images. So, yeah, I'd say that, in terms of sorry to digress somewhat, but in terms of the Kickstarter images and, the quality of the merchandise, it was really a lot of prep, and obviously, a lot of time that we spent leading into that to make sure that, we really wanted to give this project is incredibly important to my producer and I. It deals with, people who are disenfranchised. It deals with cyberbullying. It deals with shaming. It deals with coercion. And obviously, those are things which are very pertinent to audiences now. We see all of this kind of revenge porn going online. Obviously, teenagers are sharing, somewhat explicit photographs. There's a lot of cyberbullying. So that was, with the sex tape angle, that was something that we really wanted to foreground, and also to foreground this bond that exists between women, between sisters, between friends, between mothers and their sons. And we're hoping that the film will kind of give people hope, will give people inspiration, will give voice to the voiceless, and give a certain amount of confidence to those who feel dispossessed or, afraid to come forward with their own stories. So there is definitely that slant to it as well. And that's definitely an important element that we're trying to push. We're currently kind of exploring, partnering with a couple of kind of organizations, non-for-profits that seek to help girls who, or men even, who feel like they've been somewhat exploited. Obviously, we wouldn't advocate going out and indulging in bloody vengeance, but yeah, that's the entertainment part of the film. So.
Right. Fantastic. Well, Dominic, thank you so much for speaking with me. I'll be sure to paste a link to the campaign in the notes so anyone listening can check it out. Be sure to donate. Best of luck for the rest of the project.
Thank you, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk and to listen.